Hello students, in this lecture we have come to the fifth unit, and in this module we will be dealing about how the process of primary data collection aids in the process of research studies through its various means. So in this module you'll primarily learn the use of interviews, which is a mode of primary data collection, and how interviews are used in the different aspects of collecting data for a good research. Then we will also familiarize you with the different research methods and techniques which are used while employing the interview method in your research. Then this would in turn aid you to make an impact in the qualitative or quantitative research method that you're going to use. So primarily in today's outline, we will deal with what is primary data, what are the sources of primary data, the interviews, the various types of interviews, the characteristics of structured, unstructured, direct and indirect interviews, the various types of surveys, the criteria for selection of a survey, the advantages of a good questionnaire with respect to the interview method, the characteristics of a good research, the research proposal, and the need for having a good research proposal and a good research design. To begin with, we'll first analyze what is a primary data. Now data, as we know, are the set of information, the set of facts which we have in order to carry on with our research process. So it implies that when we step towards the process of making a research study, the first step that we use is the collection of the data. Now data collection in terms of primary data are those data which are collected afresh, and for the first time they happen to be very original in character. So for example, if we were to analyze a breakdown of cars in a landslide situation, we would send a reporter to the landslide situation, and then based on the kind of study that the researcher wants to make, the researcher would see how the landslide affects the general life of the tourists and public in large. So basically the first thing that the researcher would go is he will simply observe the chaos that the landslide has created in the particular situation. The primary data is usually considered to be a raw material for the research study since it's unpublished and usually from the site of study. So in case of the landslide, what will happen is we will go into the zone of landslide, and then from there, after the initial observation of observing the process of chaos that the landslide causes, then we will go into the method of collecting samples. Now the samples could be anything ranging from the soil sample to the water sample to see the causes and effects of erosion, which in turn leads to the landslide. Now with that, the validity of the primary data is also pronounced since the collection would be recent. The need for conducting a study to understand the effect of landslide arises due to the recent tempering of the natural conditions. So probably the forest must have been cut, so the grip is lost by the trees, and when the atmospheric conditions do not cooperate, then there is a sudden erosion of soil structure. The top layer of the soil almost gets completely eroded, and there might be reasons why this erosion is happening, and the wind intensity is also measured. So we go into bits and parts of the details to see why the landslide was initially caused, and how the landslide is affecting the people. Now the process to know how the landslide is caused, were there recent activities which caused the landslide, or what is the repercussion of the landslide, all of these are done through the process of interviewing. So the interview is nothing but the method of collecting data which involves presentation of an oral verbal stimulus to attain an oral verbal response. So basically, in the process of interviewing, what we do is we go to the affected site and we try to collect samples from the affected site. Now, collection of the samples from the affected site would imply that you go individually and you select either your focus group or you individually ask people questions. That is, you are presenting them with the oral stimuli. For example, you are asking them, is the landslide over here a frequent happening? Or you can ask them, has there been any deforestation that has happened over the years in this area? Or you could ask questions like, has a massive amount of trees been cut recently? Has there been any change in the river's water rising level? How do you cope with the wind changes? So you are presenting them with a oral stimuli. In return, you are getting a response. The response can be anything, either yes or no. The response could be subjective. The person might get overly creative and give you answers which might be of no relevance to your data, and so on. So basically, you give an oral stimulus. In return of that, you get a oral response, verbal response usually. So that is the interview process. The interview process can be structured, unstructured, and are usually personal or telephonic in nature. So there might be reasons where the interviewer cannot go to the site of landslide. Probably there's the blockage of roads which has happened, as a result of which cars cannot pass by the site of the disaster. So only disaster response teams are being allowed to go to the site of landslide, and hence it might not be possible. So you engage in telephonic interviews, or if even that is not possible, you ask the people who have gone into the actual site of this disaster and you ask them questions. So that is a personal form of interview. You do not ask intimate questions. Of course, you may do if the interview is of that nature, but generally you ask questions pertaining to the subject with which you are focusing your study. Now, by overcoming the resistance of the respondents, this method allows for an in-depth accuracy of the responses obtained. So, there might be situations which might not allow you to get a proper response from the respondents. So, what is happening here is, for example, the tribal people have a belief that people from the mainstream come to take over the lands, remove them from their lands at a meager sum and build factories. So this would result in a mode of displacement. This would result in a mode of dislocation. So what is happening here is the resistance is being shown by the people who reside in that land originally. So they do not want any more interference given the disastrous effect which they are already seeing with the allowing of mankind to take over. So in such situations, there might be some resistance, and this method of interviewing them personally in depth, getting comfortable with them, being one of them, enables you to collect the inside data. However, apart from being costly, this method might also over or understimulate the respondents to give imaginary answers, thereby leading to substantial errors. So, economic motive could also be an intention. So, based on that, what will happen is these respondents might be overstimulated and they would try to impress you, or they might try to create more trouble for you by stating the ill effects so that you move away from that place. So there might be an inconsistency in the responses they give, which might make errors in your overall study. Moreover, this method is very costly and it might not at all be effective at all the time. Now, these are the basic types of interview. So firstly, we have the open-ended interview, then we have the structured interview, the semi-structured interview, and the group interview. Now, open-ended interviews are basically conversational in nature. You ask questions and that have answers without predetermined format and content. So, in order to know the general mafia which operates in a particular market lane, you go suddenly and you have conversations with the shopkeepers, you have conversations with the customers, you have conversations with the residents in that area. So, what is happening? You are conducting an impromptu interview which is not having a definite goal of study. In general, you're going and asking people, or if you go and you want to analyze how a particular tourist site is, what you would do is you would go and you'll ask the visitors how they are feeling, and you'll ask the shopkeepers how the business is doing, and so on. So basically, these are conversational questions like how are you feeling, are you enjoying the place. You might ask, say, the shopkeepers whether the business is doing good or not, and so on. So the only drawback of this method is it is very time consuming. There is no specific study which you want to pinpoint in. You might have a broader domain, but you do not know where to pinpoint your study, and usually it gives you a hard time analyzing what you actually want to draw out from this method. Now we have the structured interview. The structured interview itself implies it has a structure, it has a body, it has a stringent system of rules which you need to adhere to. So this would include your predetermined questions, often requiring precise answers. For example, if you launch a detergent in the market, so you might ask specific questions. How often do you wash your clothes? Who does the laundry at home? And who does it better? Who knows the usage of particular detergent, how much it should be given or how much it shouldn't be given for a particular load? So you're asking specific questions to ascertain that the person who is using your product is also very good enough to know that, and you are also saying how your predetermined question is also enabling you to know at what frequency you should stock up your stock in the markets. You should also see at what frequency the product is being used by the consumers, and so on. So what happens in this process? It is very easy to analyze the response of such grouping similarities. Then your goals are clearly defined. You know what to say, when not to say. And you know you are not deviating from the topic asking what is your favorite color. You are just sticking to the fact that you need to know how often you wash your clothes, what is your preference of detergent, and so on. Then we have the semi-structured interview. Now, semi-structured interview can be mixed open and closed questions with a pre-planned script and additional probing. So semi-structured interview is very flexible in nature. It is not rigid. As a result of which, in a semi-structured interview, you have a specific goal in mind, but you make amendments in the situation so as to generate the most of the responses. The benefit of this system is it improves analysis capability while opening the door to additional insights. And the drawback of this method is, along with probing and prompting, there might be a bias. So the thing is, today if I give you a product to be tested in a market, and if a person is not able to specifically answer to your questions, you may adjust the questions. But what is happening is, sometimes during the process of translation, the intended question might not be conveyed in the original manner it was set to convey. So this results in biasness, and this biasness would in turn undo the process of carrying out your research. Then we also have a facilitator who guides and prompts and creates a discussion for a specific focus group. Now, the facilitator will facilitate the interview process. That is, he will make both the parties, the respondents and the representatives, the interviewer party, comfortable, and he acts as the mediator, and he will ensure that the respondents are responding correctly to the questions which are posed by the interviewer. The benefit of this method is it is low cost, quick results and believable findings, because you are explaining, you are taking the extra step to have a person who would understand your needs and explain it to the other half as and what you like it to be. The drawbacks of this method are groups are hard to control, and to schedule and manage them, it's also very difficult. If amongst a set of 15 people, 5 people don't turn up and another 5 remain very ambiguous, so it completely undermines the process of having a facilitator between them. There should be a sensible amount of reasoning between the two parties in order to come and achieve a desirable result. So, what is the pros and cons of the interview method? The interview method has its own advantages and disadvantages. The first thing is, the interview method has a very deep and free response. So if I ask you, how are you feeling today? The interview method will let you get a deep response. Say, for example, you might say that I had a very bad day yesterday, but compared to yesterday, I am feeling much better today. So, and it's a free response. You don't charge a person for giving, say, 50 word count or 200 word count. You don't do that, right? Then it's flexible and adaptable. It is flexible because you can change the interviews in order to fit to the requirements of the interviewee. And it is adaptable because with the flexibility, you are adapting or adjusting yourself to the weight of your respondents, and you are creating an optimal situation where you are getting an optimized response. Then, glimpses into respondents' tones and gestures. In an interview, the tone of a person will lead you to know whether the interview is going on in the right manner or not. If the person is speaking in a normal tone or a normal pitch level, you would know you are going right. But if the pitch changes, if the frequency changes, if there is a change in the way the person is saying, or if the person is restless, or if he's showing certain amount of gesture, then what is happening is, then there might be a loss. So, more the ability to probe. That is the edge you get from conducting an interview. Then you can follow up, and also you can clear the misunderstandings what has happened between groups. So it's like taking stock of a situation. For example, if a ruckus is created, you know that you need to firstly interview group A and group B, listen to both the parties via means of interview, and draw on a neutral answer as to why the ruckus was created in the first place. So what you're doing with the creation of the interview process, you are actually doing away with the differences which might have led to the creation of the ruckus in the initial place. The disadvantages, it is costly in time and personal. So interviews are costly in nature and they are very personal. So what happens is, suppose you are to interview a film star. What happens is, the film star can show his or her tantrums, might refuse to give an interview saying you are 2 minutes late or 3 minutes late, or might keep on dilly-dallying the process. So what happens is, even to collect a small bite, there is a amount of energy, time and money involved. And if it does not go according to your plans, all of them are at stake. Then it's impractical with large numbers of respondents. It is absolutely not possible to create an impromptu interview in a mall. Why? Because first, in that gathering of 1,000 people, you need to know what are the opinions of the people. It's absolutely not possible to segregate people with the same mind thought and then collecting the ideas which you want to collect. So basically, interviews are impractical with large numbers. It requires a good skill to interview. The interviewer should be a neutral person. The interviewer cannot show his emotional biases while conducting an interview. While conducting, for example, a political interview, the interviewer cannot show his political standings towards a particular political affiliation. He should maintain a straight face. It may be difficult to summarize responses. Sometimes there's a host of information that you get while conducting a particular interview. So what happens is, this result or this plethora of information may be completely irrelevant to the process, and moreover, what is happening is you are overstimulating the respondee, hence you are getting an over creative response. So possible biases are there. Interviewer respondent situation should be strictly monitored in order to get an optimally viable interview. Then we come to types of interview. Now types of interview consists of marketing research, different kinds of interviews. So basically in marketing research, they are the structured and unstructured interview and also the direct and indirect interview. Now these interviews can either be objective or subjective. Now structured and direct interviews and unstructured indirect interviews are considered objective interviews, whereas structured, indirect and unstructured indirect are considered to be subjective interviews. Now what is the characteristic of a structured, semi-structured and unstructured interview? So now the interviewers fall along a continuum from structured to unstructured. Now what is a structured interview? A structured interview is one in which there is a set of questions that are asked in a standard way across all respondents. So the structured interview could be such that you ask the respondents about a particular product that you want to launch. For example, if you want to launch a scooter, you ask, have you seen about a scooter? Where have you heard about our particular brand of scooter? Do you think our particular brand of scooter is better than the existing brand after taking a mileage test or a test drive, and so on? So it's structured. You might also ask questions which are preset, because mileage is very important in a car or scooter before you purchase. So in a structured interview, all of the questions are asked in a normal manner, and it is a very standardized process by which you ask it. Then you have the semi-structured interview. Now, semi-structured interview has specific topic areas and a general set of questions, but the interview flows like a conversation and topics are covered as they come up. For example, you are taking an autobiographical interview of a film star. So your major questions in it would be to know firstly his early days, his struggle, and how he made it big into the film industry. So when you conduct such an interview, it is semi-structured. Your goal is behind in your mind. Keeping that in mind, you make the interview as flexible as possible. You make it sound as casual as possible. So you begin by asking the sir, so tell us about your early days. How did your early innings in the industry began? Tell us the moments of hardship you faced while being in the industry. Has there been any instance where you have been dragged into any controversy within the industry? How are your personal equations with your colleagues? So what is happening? It's a semi-structured interview, but you are carrying on a narrative in which, without offending the respondent or without overstimulating the respondent, you are getting just the desired amount of response which you need. Then an unstructured interview has a topic area to be explored, but what gets covered is left up to the respondent. An opening question might introduce the topic as, I'd like to get your perspective about, say, the networking systems. What would you like to tell me? So you have no clue whether the person is good enough in networking systems or not, but you know that the person has an allied interest in the same. So instead of offending the person and directly asking him, tell me about your expertise in networking systems, you would rather present it in a more refined manner by saying, I would like to know about your perspective about the networking systems. So when real questions are not preset and the interview takes a conversational approach, it is also called as qualitative interviewing. Now, qualitative interviewing is what? It is nothing but the process where there is no preset conversation, there is a vague question and you build on the topic then on right on there. So when I ask you, tell me something about yourself, you are giving the respondent the entire creativity. You're giving him a stimulus where he can just be himself and you build it on from there and you carry on. That is the qualitative aspect of interviewing, which is usually very subjective in nature. The next is characteristics of direct interviews. Now, the questions and acceptable responses are specified in advance. Responses are rated for appropriateness of the content. They are also called standardized interviews as they are pre-planned to a high degree of accuracy and precision. For example, if I want to know how using a particular brand of clothing has given you a remarkable difference in your overall outlook in comparison to the different branding of clothing available in the market, we would go on and ask you a direct question. So the direct questions are nothing but the questions and acceptable responses are certified. So in the beginning of the interview itself, you tell them you need to know only what you are asking. You will rate them only on the basis of their response towards that specified content. For example, after tasting a particular product, you will want to know, was the product good enough or not? Yes or no? Would you like to reuse the product? Yes or no? So it's basically specified, it is standardized, it's normal, it's pre-planned. There is a high degree of accuracy where you know whether the person has liked your product, the person wants to reuse your product, is there a demand for your product, how should you increase your supply for the product, and so on. Now, characteristics of indirect interviews. Now, indirect interviews are not created by direct questions or commands as what the candidate should be asked. So, indirect interviews are something you beat about the bush. You do not go and ask them, are you comfortable with the means and modes of menstrual hygiene? You don't ask them. You will ask them, how is your relationship with your mother and sister? Do they confide with you about their personal problems? Have you ever helped them during times of illness? Do you help them? Then you build around. Do you help them during that time of the month? You still not saying about whether the menstrual hygiene factor is your main concern. You just concentrating on getting into your data by beating around the bush. So no set format is followed. Candidate is encouraged to express himself on any topic of his interest, his expectation, background, etc. So because there is no set format, you do not directly place the question on the male candidate asking, what is your opinion on menstrual hygiene? No, you will not do that. What you will do, you will ask slowly, without offending his views, you ask them gently, what is your equation with the other sex? How do you perceive the gender stereotypes in our society? What would you do given a chance? If you had to help or if you had to take the load of women during certain times of the month. Are you in tune with the notion of giving a paid menstrual leave during those days? So that is how you go on. What are his expectations for women at during those days? Does he expect something or does he expect himself to go and help them? So all that. In doing so, the interviewer looks for traits of his character, nature of his aspirations, strengths, weakness, potential, etc. So if you see that the person is becoming offended, you nip your questions in the bud and you take a different stance in a manipulative and flexible manner so that it does not offend your respondent. Or this would also lead you to know about the person's aspirations, what he aspires to do when it comes to women during that time of the month, or what are the strengths, the weaknesses. He cannot be of any use. He is religious in nature. It is against his belief to speak of a subject which is considered to be taboo by him or which is unspeakable by him, and his potential, whether educating him further would make a change in his mindset or whether you should stop talking about the topic right then and there so that you do not make him feel uncomfortable and he just walks off. So all these factors is done in an indirect interview where without directly throwing the question on the respondent's face, you develop the topic through normal modes of conversation, allow the person to be on his own self, allow him to give you more inputs, and then from there you build upon the intended goal which you are trying to build. Now, surveys. Surveys are very important while conducting an interview. What are surveys? Surveys are nothing but procedures in quantitative research in which the investigators administer a survey to a sample or to the entire population of people in order to describe the attitudes, opinions, behaviors, or characteristics of their population. So survey is nothing but you are trying to create a process in which you are trying to test whether in that particular sample your mode of intended product is selling or not. For example, surveys are created city-wise in order to know the cost of living capacity of a particular city. So we tend to have different kinds of surveying questionnaires, and in that questionnaire we'll try to analyze it through the various means whether a particular sample of the society is able to afford certain things, whether their aspirations are more, whether they can actually afford more but they are not willing to give in too much, and so on. So basically it can be just on a sample or it can be on the entire population. So trial runs are done by Reserve Bank of India to see how it goes well on the entire population. So if there is a negative effect of the same, if there is a high cost in printing, then it is taken off. So what happens is you are dropping in changes in the variable to see how the variables will react to each other given the variable which you are tweaking. So how is a survey conducted? First is you develop a survey. Post the development of your survey, you have a sample which is ready. That sample is something which you put to test. Post that you communicate about it and then you administer it again. Then you see or you analyze how valid it is or not, and then you give up your feedback. So ideally a survey process would employ that a certain idea has to be developed, a certain idea has to be created, and only then from there you create your sample of the thing. For example, if you have the idea of creating a machine that can peel off garlic in a higher quantity and in a lesser period of time. So what you'll do, first you develop the idea and then your sample garlic peeler. Then you test it whether it is working or not. Then you communicate to the authorities, you communicate to the nearby industrial designing units that you have produced a garlic peeler, the cost is this much, the manufacturing cost is this much, you can sell at this amount and create revenue. So you are communicating. Now you will administer your garlic peeler in the nearby restaurants. Then you analyze how these restaurants are using your garlic peeler. Then you validate it that since this requires more nitty-gritty, so probably your garlic peeler is not a success, or people still prefer using the traditional method, so no point, or people are finding it useful for something which requires 3 to 4 hours of their time. Now they can do it in 1 hour. So that is your feedback, and from there you know whether you have to go forward with your maiden project or you have to nip it in the bud. Now, uses of survey research. The survey research is used for sampling from a population. It is used for collecting data through questionnaires or interviews. It is used for designing instruments for data collection and obtaining a high response rate. So usually surveys are sent in the form of questionnaire methods. So from a population, what is happening is you are taking in their opinions, whether a particular sampling method is working well with them or not. Then you collect the data through the questionnaires and interviews. Then you start designing instruments for data collection. Then at the end, you obtain a very high response rate. So this is one of it. Now, survey research in cases of population can be used to understand the effect a particular culture is having on a particular stimulus. Through the various questionnaires, you can collect the side effects and the drawbacks of the effect. Then you need to design instruments for data collection. Then also you need to see the response rate of the collection of such a data, because this is the sole purpose why the survey was created, because it caters to a large population group. Now, types of surveys or interviews as well. So you have telephonic interviews, in-home interviews, small intercept interviews, computer-assisted personal interviews, mail panels, electronic surveys, and so on. So these are the types through which your surveys and interviews are created. Now, what is a personal interview? Personal interview usually takes place on a one-on-one basis, or it can be taken in situation where the interviewer personally goes and interviews the focus group. So what is happening in personal interview? The main advantages that happen in a personal interview is that there is a spontaneous response which can be obtained. So in a personal interview, you cannot have people shutting up on their opinion. So you need to constantly go on with the interview process. You cannot call it pass. The interview process will go on, and then from there you obtain a higher response rate. So the higher response rate is created when there is an active participation. Now, in personal interviews, active participation is one of the primal things. Then you have information at a greater depth. Now, when we say information at a greater depth, it implies that your mode of understanding is not only restricted to the peripheral layers of information, but you probe in deep to get better insights. Then you have flexibility of restructuring the questionnaire. The interviewer, by his skill, can also overcome resistance. Non-response is generally low. Now, the samples can also be controlled more effectively. Personal information can also be obtained. Take us back to the example of the landslide. The landslide has occurred. Now you need spontaneous response. This spontaneous response will be provided to you by the authorities, the villagers residing in that area, the tourists who are finding it difficult to carry on with their onward journey, the disaster management team, and so on. So what is happening? You are achieving a higher response rate, and information is at a greater depth because you are not interviewing from one perspective. You are not acquiring insight into your work from one perspective of a tourist. You are gathering information from villagers who stay in that area daily in and out. You are gathering information from the relief team who has to come and distribute the food samples, who has to come and distribute the medicines and so on into that area of disaster. You get information from the civil engineers who work on the real time. So you get a chronotoptical information from the civil engineers who will tell you. This is the reason why, because of constant deforestation, the roots are not able to hold grip. The hills has been cut. What do you expect when there is no strong holding to hold the land? Obviously, when it rains, it will get washed away. You will get opinions from the geologists who would examine the sand quality for you. So you see how greater amount of information you are getting, and to each his own. You are flexibly restructuring the questionnaire by conducting the interview on different persons. You don't ask the questioner what have you done with the money which was allocated by the center for this particular purpose. Now, with your skill, you can overcome the resistance by the civil engineers. So if they say I have pocketed 50% of the cash, 50% I have employed, and non-response is generally low. So what is happening is he is bound to answer where did the money go. He is answerable to the public. He is answerable to the amount the government has allocated. So then the samples can be controlled more effectively and through the personal information attained. So if the villagers say that this particular engineer is known for corruption, he means the money himself. You're gathering personal information. So the sample can be controlled. Next time, when the government allocates money, they will see to it that better individuals are given an opportunity to conduct their construction process in that landslide area. So, by collecting all the supplementary information about respondents' personal characteristics and environment, the interviewer throws on the value in the particular study of erosion, in the particular study of landslides, the civil constructions which takes place in sites of disaster, the role of the disaster relief team, the role of common public, how they help the people in that affected zone, and so on. So basically, this is the advantage of carrying out a personal interview. Now, what is the disadvantages of carrying out a personal interview? The primary disadvantage of carrying out a personal interview is that it is expensive and time consuming. It is expensive because you need to travel to that area to personally interview that person, to personally interview that people who are affected. You need to take your permissions, you need to take your requisite time out. It's time consuming to take permission. So probably you might lose on important things while you're taking permission or while you're taking the time to travel and to go into that area. Now, it is not suitable if respondents want to be anonymous. So if a chief engineer is corrupted and the subordinate engineer wants to personally tell you that, okay, our chief engineer is a corrupted one, the funds are all pocketed by him, which is why we have to compromise on the materials which we use for the construction process and all. So what is happening is he's not able to say. Why? Because his job might be at stake. So the respondent may give biased information. The junior engineer might say, no, we are using good quality of materials. We are using the entire resource which has been allocated by the government for this project. Some executive people are not approachable, so data collected may be inadequate. To what extent the junior engineer is aware of the situation in which the construction is taking place is also doubtable. So if 60 uh, 600 crores is being allocated for a particular project, what if the junior engineer is aware of the fact that only 300 crores is allotted? What if the executive attendants over there have already minted the 300 crores, the extra 300 crores? So all this might hinder the process of the research. Takes more time when samples are more. Supervisors have to do more complex work of selecting, training, and supervising the field staff. So in the on-site study, the field staff, what if the interviewer himself is biased and he gives a biased report? So all of these are the disadvantages of having a personal interview. The next is the telephonic interview. Now, telephonic interview is the process in which the information is collected from the respondent by asking him questions on phone. The combination of telephone and computer has made this method even more popular. So in telephonic method, either you can directly contact the person, you don't need to go, you don't need to follow the protocol, or you can directly get hold of the number and talk to him. Or in cases where large samples are needed to be sent, what you do, you have a preset voice, and in order to know the workings, the preset voice with its preset options will enable you to have an insight. So what is happening? For example, if you want to know about your service provider's service, what you do, you create a preset voice and then you implant that voice via a telephonic call. For example, say you have launched a particular internet providing network service. So you ask them, have you been receiving 25 Mbps of data regularly? Yes or no? So for yes, press 1. For no, press 2. Then you again question, have you faced any disruption in the video calls that you're making? For yes, press 1. For no, press 2. So these preset options are being set in the computer, and all the computer does is calls up the individual, and in a mass basis the interviews are carried out. Now, what is the advantage and disadvantage of a telephonic interview? Now, telephonic interview is advantageous because you have faster results. So you don't have to go to that place, collect the data. So faster results are there because when you give a preset data, it is already analyzed by the computer, or you analyze it in your phone and then you segregate it. It is inexpensive because if you are subscribing to a larger plan, obviously what is happening is you are conducting mass calls. So it won't charge you more. You will have plans for massive consumption given to you by the telephone service providers. You have better geographical coverage. Sitting here in Mumbai, I can call someone in the US, I can call someone in Kashmir, I can call someone in the remotest of the remotest part of the country and get hold of the desired information. Then you have irresistibility. That is, you can carry on without any hindrance in the process, and it is capable of reaching to people who show resistance. Then timing is like early or late everything is okay. So people who are unapproachable, you can directly conduct a telephonic interview through them. Then privacy and better control, and coincidental data is immediate feedback. So of course you have the privacy of your caller. Many provider services do not disclose the data of the individual quickly. So what is happening, if you're taking an anonymous interview also, you may do it because there is no risk of your information being leaked out. What are the disadvantages? There is no exhibit. So there is no graphic description of how you would conduct the interview. So the respondents may get disinterested after a point of time. Then long interviews are not possible. Of course, who wants to keep on hanging a phone? It gets warm, or you might get tired, or there might be a disruption in the connectivity. So long interviews are not possible. Inability to make judgment. A person might change his tone to give you inaccurate results. So you're unable to make the judgment. Answering machines and caller identification devices. These are one of the major hindrances where you're trying to reach to a person, but the caller machine or the answering machine is telling you that kindly drop a message, I'll get back to you later. Sampling problem is obsolete. Laboratory, it has a poor sampling frame. Not everybody will have a phone. Even if I have a phone, who knows, my phone would be switched on for the time when you've scheduled the interview. It would just switch off, and then there is no control, there is no communication between the respondent and the interviewee, and then the matter does not take place. So it goes for a total loss. Next we go to mail survey. Now mail survey involves sending a cover letter and a questionnaire to a specific person. So in a mail survey, what will you do is, you will send a cover letter which will let the person know about the intended interview you are planning to conduct and the intended purpose and intended results which you are expecting from a particular person. Then the cover letter states the purpose, sponsor, instructions and time of return. So in the cover letter, the purpose of the interview is clearly laid out. In the cover letter, the timing of return, the expectations which the interviewee has is already given. The questionnaire itself is totally self-explanatory, clear and simple. So the interviewer does not need to go again and again and tell them this is what I want, because it's clearly stated. Now, what are the advantages and disadvantages of the mail survey process? Now, one of the primal advantage of mail survey process is it is inexpensive. The mail survey process is inexpensive because the printouts can be carried out in a larger quantity in a lower cost. So it can be accomplished by the researcher alone. You do not need additional help to carry out with your mailing survey. It allows access to samples that might be hard to reach in person or in telephone. Now respondents take sufficient time to give out thoughtful answers. Now what is happening here is, in a mail survey, when you set a questionnaire with your instructions, you know that the person will read it, and once he reads it, the entire process will be explained in totality. So, in a mail survey, what is happening is, the responses will be accurate because the respondee has got an ample amount of time to analyze the questions which you have placed on him, and then he can rationally think about his responses and carry on with the process. Now the disadvantage of this method is it has less opportunities to encourage the cooperation of the respondents. So what if the respondent does not want to do your survey? The survey sheet will simply get tossed into the dustbin, and the interviewee will not even get a chance to pacify him to take up the test. Assistance is less if while filling the survey form, the respondent gets stuck on a certain question. You will not be able to assist him on spot. Then they have a tendency to produce low response rate. Why? Because of a lack of interaction, because of the mechanical means in which practically you are literally ordering the person to fill the questionnaire. Why would I do it? I don't want to do it. So you have low response rate. So you do not lend themselves well to obtaining information from certain types of samples. Either generally the respondee might want to respond, but he is too illiterate to even understand the concepts and even tick mark or cross mark into your survey form, or either the thing might be such that the respondee himself does not want to give you an answer. The answers might be ambiguous, or he might find it very arrogant of you to send a mail sample survey instead of conducting a personal or a telephonic one, and he might simply not do it. So it would just put your research process into a complete disarray. Now, what is the criteria for selection of a survey? Now, several criteria have to be considered for a suitable survey method. The first is the complexity. The second is the adequacy of data. The third is the accuracy of data. Then you'll have sample controls, time requirements, acceptable levels of non-response, and cost. All of these will be considered during a particular survey method, which shall be dealt in detail in the coming slides. The first is complexity of a survey. How complex your survey is. The complexity of a survey questionnaire would depend on the problem at hand. And it is always better to construct questions which will make the respondent comfortable. In case that cannot be done, the researcher can aid in simplifying the questionnaire by giving cues, multiple choice questions, and explanations wherever necessary. So what is happening in a complex type of survey is that you give a problem, you present a research problem, and in that you expect them to give suitable answers or response to the questions which you have posed with them with. So it is always better to construct questions which will make the respondent comfortable. In case it cannot be done, then what happens is you have to provide certain cues. Cues are what? Certain stimulus through which the person will be able to relate to the main stimulus and provide a response. Then multiple choice question would make their job a little easier. Strongly agree, strongly disagree, sometimes never, and so on, occasionally. And then you need to have explanations wherever necessary. So for example, if we are trying to conduct a seminar, trying to conduct a survey on how a particular group of teachers teach you. So you need to explain to them that, do not be afraid in giving feedback about your teachers, because your identity will be kept anonymous. So carry on fearlessly and give a rating of your teacher. So all of these factors will be taken into account while dealing with the complexity of a survey method. The next is accuracy to check the survey data. Now, most of the surveys nowadays are computer-aided systems, software. So, in this, the computer-aided surveys, there are the most accurate ways of gathering data, but the software and hardware may be beyond project resources. So, the software and the hardware, for example, a laptop for every interviewer may be beyond the project resources. You might not have that much of budget. Then the computer-aided subject surveys also allows to build in many logical checks. So one question routing and responses as is possible in the presentation of data creation. It allows you a flexibility in creation of the complexity of the survey paper. Then computer aided surveys. In the non-computer aided surveys, over the initial response which have been generated, checks can be conducted. So there is only one glitch there is the amount will be less. Then at the point of data entry transcription, if data entry software is used, then probably you might get an accuracy of results. However, there are cheap data entry packages which are available for the researchers to be used in case there is not a high budget. The only feasible option may be to enter data without checks directly into the spreadsheet. So we use Excel spreadsheet and SPSS packages. So you directly enter the data without making it go through the preliminary test, and then you provide the validation of the checks afterwards using statistical packages. In case of humanities and social sciences, we use the SPSS packages or Visual Basic Code in Excel or XS. Now, the interviewer and the respondent effect. The physical appearance of the interviewer is very important, and how he conducts the survey is very important. The respondent's effect is the guinea pig effect. That is, the guinea pig effect is the respondent goes with the mindset that, okay, they are planning only to test me and I'll allow them to test myself. Then you have the response set. Now, response set is what? The response set is modulated in a way that the set of respondees will go into a structured response. Then you have the halo effect, where the respondees believe that everything is right. They have a very good aura or a halo. The angels have a halo over their head. So this is a halo effect. So whatever they give will always be a good response. Social desirability effect, the truth might be something else. So if in a social survey of diabetes, if you ask a diabetic person how good is your sugar control, the socially desirable response is good, occasionally good and all. No one will say that I have zero control over sugar. No one, trust me. So you give socially desirable responses. So all of these are important in order to get a proper result. The next is sample control surveys. Now, sample control is possible in surveys through 4 modes, and for instance, in personal surveys, if availability of the person is assured, then the survey can be conducted seamlessly. If there is no person with whom are you going to create a personal interview? However, in larger surveys like those conducted in malls, control is possible only with those people with which the researchers have their access. For example, out of the 20 persons scheduled for an interview, only 15% turn up. Of course, there will be a visible difference in your end results. Time requirements. The telephonic interviews takes the least time. If the telephonic interviewer is properly trained, then at the end of the interview provided, there is no connectivity issue. The data collected is immediate and accurate. The mail survey interviews take the longest time. So, if there is no disruption in connectivity, if the person is willing to reply to all the questions that you put through in the telephonic conversation, then what happens? The telephonic interview is a success. The mail survey takes a long time to reach to the respondent as well as to get back to the interviewer, and in some processes it is completely lost. So these are the time requirement factors for a success of any survey sample. Then we come to cost. Now, personal interviews are always expensive, and when compared to other interviews, it requires not only the emotional and the physical availability of both the interviewer and the respondent, but it also includes factors like if the person is cordial enough to sit through you in that particular point of time and give you the interview or not. Then telephonic interviews cost much less. So you can just wind up. You might be in the comforts of your home. You can work from home and be done with your telephonic process. Intercept message interviews are economical. Then again, the cost of interviews varies with the type of questionnaire, the response rate, the geographical area which is covered, and so on. So, if you are sending your questionnaire to Kashmir from a central place like Mumbai, the time to travel, the time to deliver, the time to answer, and the time to send back the response, obviously there's a lot of logistics involved, and if it fails, then so does your interview fail. The next is the advantage of the questionnaire method in terms of an interview. The mail interview or any kind of interview which we have discussed now, all of these consist of the questionnaire which is sent to the individual for their response. So what are the advantages of the questionnaire interview once you receive the questionnaires? Firstly, questionnaire is easy to construct and distribution is easy and inexpensive. So the questionnaire method, once you follow a set strategies of do's and don'ts for your questions, so the questionnaire is very easy to construct. Now distribution is easy and inexpensive. You can carry bulk printouts of your questionnaire and you may ask people to distribute it for you in bulk. The responses are easy to tabulate. So in a questionnaire, the responses are easy to tabulate, implies easy to analyze, easy to segregate, easy to group them, sequence them. The respondents' replies are free. Usually in questionnaires, people don't charge you amount for giving a reply to the questions asked. But if you were to arrange a interview with a person of a higher strata, for example, today if you want to interview a B-town actor or actress, they might charge you an amount which might be whopping, and a ridiculous amount might be charged only because of the fact that they agreed to give you an interview. Now, confidential information may be given anonymously and freely in case of questionnaires. You will not go and ask the respondent that why have you given me this information. Whatever is written in the paper remains in the paper and it is confidential. Then the respondents can fill out the questionnaire at their own will. So the questionnaire usually has its own time period. So you can get back to me in 10 days, you can get back to me in a week. So the respondents will see what time is flexible for him and what he can do to conduct, what he can do to give you a good response. So the respondents can give you more accurate replies. That is, in a questionnaire, the question itself will serve the purpose of what you are exactly looking at. So by doing so, you get accurate responses of whatever you plan to get through. The next is, what is the characteristics of a good research? You have implemented the interview, you have implemented the questionnaire and everything. But why have you done so? Because you want to carry on a good research process. So, what is the essential factors for it? So, for a good research, you should have a clearly defined purpose. So, for example, if I have to conduct a study of post-traumatic stress disorder on Iraq war veterans, I will have that as the purpose of my study. Right. Now you will start a detailed research process. The detailed research process would include getting my primary and secondary data right in the first process. So, sitting here in Mumbai, it's not possible for me, given the time factor, to personally go to Iraq and collect materials. So, I'll rely on my primary source and the secondary source of data. Now, my primary source of data will be the immediate Iraqi literature, which is existing in the internet and which is existing in the form of books and journals. My secondary data would be the interview view excerpts, which I might find it published and in various articles of the previous wars, right? So, thoroughly planned design. Now, what I am going to look into the research study is thoroughly planned through my methodology. This should include high ethical standards. Now, if I am probing into Iraq war and a sensitive subject like post-traumatic stress disorder, I need to find out not only about the current prospects which are going on stabilizing the Iraq war veterans, but I need to find out how the Iraq war veterans have provided insights into the war from their current innings, and also what is the difference between the First World War, Second World War and the Vietnam War, which was fought prior to the Iraq war. The limitations addressed is, because I cannot carry a study of First World War, Second World War, Vietnam War and then go to the Iraq war, I would tell my research committee that I am concentrating only on Iraq war, so that due to the vastness of the other wars, the subject matter is limited, and from there I will not jump into the other aspects. So I may draw on from the First World War, Second World War, I may draw on from the Vietnam War, draw on similar concepts of trauma, draw on the similar concepts where I will know about shell shock or the process in which the soldiers undergo a trauma, and when they come from war they have difficulty adjusting to the normal life. From First World War, I'll take on concepts of hysteria. I will take on concepts where women were confined to rooms so that they could deal with the trauma which the war causes to them. Then from Second World War onwards, I will see how the medical changes, the medical gaze, the transplantation and everything has been done through the process, how the ethical standards of the usage of prosthetic device has enabled for a better quality of life, or is it good to harvest organs so that a person can get his life further? What is the fruitfulness of living a life which is challenged? or what is the relationship that the doctor and the nurse has towards the patient, what is the relationship of a wife, of a soldier who goes to a war, what happens if the soldier itself is a woman, and what are the ethical attributes which goes for a woman in order to come back to a normal society, tend to her husband, tend to her kids, tend to a normal society, and so on. So the limitations, the educate analysis is done. The unambiguous presentation is also done. In this example where I have cited about the various ongoings, the process by which I would describe my thesis on post-traumatic stress disorder in Iraq war veterans has been given, and then I will give conclusions justifying why I decided to do the study, what are my findings, is my findings leading to newer insights or not, and so forth. Then I give credentials on how the study has been made possible to the various persons involved during the process, and so on. So basically, what was the sole aim on going through a detailed process of Iraq war study was that how the formation of a research framework is done. So in this entire Iraq war proposal story example which I have given you, I have explained to you about a conceptual framework in which the research study is going to be placed. So I have given you the war concept. Now the conceptual frameworks could be from the aspects of colonialism, post-colonialism, modernist studies, feminism, while understanding women's relationship, trauma, the body in pain, the body itself can be one subject. Then the other subjects through which we could look into trauma is the body. Then apart from the body, we can also look into concepts of medical gaze, the concepts of cognitive processes, and on. So this framework will enable an optimization of the study carried in an effective manner. So if I want to look into the cognitive aspects, for example, of a war trauma study, what will I do? I will not go into the political history of war. I will not go into why the American forces came and invaded Iraq, or why a similar war was repeated in Afghanistan. I will not do that. But since I have structured on a cognitive perspective, what we will do is we'll try to understand the war from a cognitive perspective. So what happens in cognition that is related to your human brain? I'll try to understand factors of trauma. I'll try to understand how in certain situations certain modes are developed for a person to deal with the stresses. For example, if I play a video game to a Iraq war veteran, I'll observe how the process of shooting triggers a reaction on him. Then it aids in collection of relevant evidences, thereby optimizing the uses of time, money, and resources. See, personally, I have not traveled to Iraq, but with the help of a clearly defined research proposal, clearly defined research methodology, while drawing on a systematic approach, I am saving my time, money, and resources and energy by not throwing myself directly into the war zone, but utilizing the materials available to the optimum. So a flexible research proposal minimizes biases and maximizes the reliability of the work conducted. So I am not getting moved by the biased opinions of an overstimulated respondee. Instead, by having a clear-cut picture and a manner by which I plan to proceed with my study, I am removing a lot of errors which might have come while conducting the study. Next, is the elements of the research proposal. So the title is very important. So if I am about to do a study on Iraq War, probably I will write a title where I will say Analysis of War Veterans of Iraq War with Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder. The introduction would again come where I would go on with what is post-traumatic stress disorder and how post-traumatic stress disorder is seen from early war period and so on and forth. The statement of the problem would be what? That identifying if extraneous variables like video games and all act as a stressor for veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. The rationale and justification and significance of my study would be that if presented with a stressor like a war setup, a soldier might start showing behavioral changes. The scope and limitations, how it is possible for me to analyze it say from various protagonists in literature. The limitations of my study would be it is not possible for me to go into the Iraq war zone or go into a rehabilitated war space and study the veterans. Objectives of the research is already clear by now that I attempt to make a cognitive study of the war veterans. The operational definitions of the term, clearly I will use the post-traumatic stress disorder and its effects of the diagnostic and statistical manual which has been given. Hypothesis is if presented with certain amount of stresses or triggers, the responses are huge. Methodology used here would be just exploratory and descriptive. Then time and schedule and work plan will be shown that in order to show how well I am going on with my research. In 1 year I will show you my work, in second year I will show you another work, by the end of it I will give you my synopsis, then I will submit my thesis and so on. Budget, cost and estimated build-up is already seen. Then organization of the report and chapter line, you need to have a report, say 10,000 word report or like that, and then that will lead you to understand the time period which you have invested in creating the research study. Then we have notions of bibliography and references, we draw on conclusions, and then the appendices. Now, what is the statement of purpose in a research proposal? So what do you really want, right? This is seen in the research proposal. So I want to really conduct a study on post-traumatic stress disorder. What are your findings and contributions? That apart from studying the various works of trauma in war veterans, I am trying to correlate it with say the Kargil war veterans. Explain the important aspects of what you really intend to do. I intend to conduct a cognitive study where I will try to examine the effects of trauma on an individual. Explain why it is so important, because I want to have a better understanding of how the war veterans are left to, or what they go through post the war is over. Introduce the problem domain to the reader. The problem domain would be cognitive studies, trauma studies, and so on. Why are you so motivated about working on this problem? Because the soldiers have given their life for the country and I do not want it to be a dying horse. Assume a general audience with little or no expertise in the field. My general audience would be a academic crowd, or my general audience could be somewhat from the defense. So that is how you do the statement of purpose in a research methodology. The next is, why do you need to have this statement of research proposal? This is for the smooth sailing. Without any interruptions, you need to carry on with your research operations. This stands for advanced planning of methods, so that if there is a glitch, you know where to cover up your glitch and take it off from there. Then this bears a great need for reliability of your needs. It helps you to give directions. It helps in decision making. Now, research designs will prevent you from making blind searching. So it helps researchers to anticipate potential problems in the collection of the data. The next is the method which goes into writing the research proposal. So the method section is very important because it tells your research committee how you plan to tackle your research problem. So it will provide your work plan and describe you the activities necessary for the completion of your project. So the first thing is you need to have a guiding principle for writing the method section, since it should contain sufficient information for the reader to know what methodology is being used. Furthermore, since there are no well-established and widely accepted canons in qualitative analysis, you need to have a method section which would explain why you are dealing with certain theories. Now, most importantly, data collection process in qualitative research has far impact on the results than on a quantitative research. So, when you write something, when you are giving a subjective opinion on something, it is very important that the method of writing is done in a proper manner. Elsewise, there will be structural changes in your entire work, and if you are just putting digits and numbers and factors, people will just not look into your report. It will be just another collection of data. So it's very important to write your research properly so that systematically you present to the authority what you have gained for so long, what is your contribution, and from where you took off. So, the research proposal side usually follows this technique. So, first you define your research problem, then you review your literature. Literature review is of two types. First, you review the concept and theories, and then you go on reviewing the previously found data. That's your primary data. Then you formulate your hypothesis and create your research design. You collect the data, analyze the data, then you interpret and report. So you define the research problem of studying PTSD. You review the literature from World War I to Vietnam War to Iraq War. You formulate your hypothesis. What are you exactly looking for? You formulate your research design, whether it will be analytical study, descriptive study, whether you are employing ethnography, if not why. Then you collect the data, the primary data and secondary data, you analyze it, then you prepare your own report while proving your hypothesis. Now, the literature review. Now, the literature review aspect is important because the literature review will be nothing but a summary of what has been already published in a book or in a paper. For example, after studying a certain method, you want to create a literature review of that method. For example, if I were to create a literature review on post-traumatic stress disorder, so I will go from the early innings of post-traumatic stress disorder. I will see how it was called as shell shock, how shell shock came to be known. I will see how the term railway concussion of spine came to be known. They believe that soldiers who suffer from jolts during their train journey while going to the war field often had a emotional disturbance given to the fact that there was a change in the spinal fluid. As a result of this, it altered their mental faculty. Then we'll go to the concept of neurasthenia, where it became a disease of the elite. So in order to escape from work, they used to feign illness. They used to say, I have just come from the war, I am tired and I don't want to work. So all of these. Then what will happen is we'll go through the statistical manual. So what I am doing is I am going from the early innings to the later innings, and where I am going through whatever has been provided to me via the book, via the paper, because technically I was not born when the early innings of neurasthenia started, or the early innings of post-traumatic stress disorder or shell shock started. So after studying that, I will start writing a summary about the strengths of the method, the weakness of the method, the application of the method. The strength of the method is that WAS has been existing since a long period of time. Before it was pronounced as post-traumatic stress disorder, it came via Vietnam War, but before it was even named as shell shock or railway spine disease or neurasthenia or hysteria, we didn't know what it was. For example, in early Greek mythology, we do have Julius Caesar, or we do have Odysseus or Sophocles and all. They cried a lot once they came from war. So that was something which was unheard of, not studied. Now because of the research, we are able to know what it was exactly. The weakness of this method is it can be huge. If you have to conduct a study from the early innings, from the Greek period up to Iraq War, and then you see there are other wars which are happening. Post-Iraq War, 9/11 happened. So it is huge. The applications of the method, what are you contributing, is seen in the literature review. How, by understanding the various notions of what are you contributing to the society, is seen. Now the format of the literature review is, it includes your title page, it includes your acknowledgement, whom you want to thank, whom you don't want to thank, it's totally optional and personal. Then the abstract. Abstract is nothing but a short summary which allows the person to know what you are exactly looking for in this study. Abstract, a good abstract will not exceed more than 100 to 150 words. Then the table of contents, what you have included in your research, the list of figures, the list of tables, your main text, the references and the appendixes. Now this is a sample literature review format. The introduction is given. So a concise definition of the topic is given. Then introduction should also note intentional exclusions. This review will not explore the diaries. So this review will not explore the wartime period from early Greek period till the Vietnam War. So the limitations are stated. Another purpose of the introduction is to state the general findings of the review. Then comes your main body, where you organize the evaluation of the sources, and usually thematic approaches are very successful. The themes of feminism, the themes of cognition, the themes of post-colonialism, the themes of political discrepancies. The theme is very useful. So each work should be critically summarized and evaluated for premise, methodology and conclusion, and you should use logical connections and transitions to connect the sources. The last would be your conclusion, where you summarize your key findings in general terms. Now notable commonalities between words which may be favorable or not is also included, and this section is the reviewer's opportunity to justify the research proposal. Now, bibliography. The bibliography provides full bibliographic details for all the sources referenced in your assignment. Now, the bibliography would include the arrangement of the books you have used in an alphabetical order. The single list is the one which you get at the end of your assignment, is your bibliography, where you let people know about the journals, the articles and all the electronic sources that you have used to create your research study. Now, what happens in a bibliographic process? In a bibliographic process, you start with a format of the books in which it is written. So you just cannot write a book saying Professor Kulkarni prescribed by ISBM. No, you can't do that. You have to write about the title. The title comes first, Kulkarni, MV, then you write the name of the book, the place of publication, the edition of publication, the year of publication, whether it's in the print format or it's in a web series format, print, like that. That is how the bibliography is done. You cite it and then you give the index. Now we come to another concept, which is the evaluation of the proposal. Now, how will you evaluate a proposal? Now, the first thing is, how does the research relate to the national or regional priorities? How will the study on post-traumatic stress disorder relate to a study of the regional and national capacity? What knowledge and information will be obtained? Will this study generate new knowledge? That is, what knowledge will you obtain, and will it help in better resettling of the veterans of war? What is the ultimate purpose that the knowledge obtained from the study will serve? What will the study benefit patients, advance understanding or influence policy? Then will the study fill in the gaps in the existing literature? How will the results be disseminated, and how will the results be used, and who will be the beneficiaries? So what is happening here is, you are evaluating your proposal in a manner where step by step you are deciding on the contributions, the validity, the relevance of your research proposal. It is worth spending your time, energy and money on that study or not, and how, if you even do so, how will it further encourage a better study? How will it fill the existing knowledge gaps, and how will you disseminate the results, and how will the results be used, and who will be the beneficiaries? All of these would be useful in evaluating your research proposal. So the next concept is a research design. Now, a good research design should be flexible, appropriate, reliable and economical with a low error rate. So, every research will have a research design, or the ways and means by which you want to carry forward with your research study. So, it should be flexible. Whenever you want to make changes, you should be able to make changes. It should be appropriate, that is, no research design will be considered useful if it does not give you an appropriate and reliable information. It should also be very economic, and the error rate should be low. So since a single research design cannot solve every research problem, it is useful in particular purpose in which it is employed. So if a research design is exploratory or formulative, the design should be flexible in order to allow the different considerations of the same phenomenon. Now, if your research design is experimental or hypothetical, it should establish a good relation between the variables and minimize error. So, to formulate your research design, the factors which you need to see are: the research design should be good enough to let you know the different aspects which are beneficial to get a thorough idea of the research design. Now, the research design is either experimental or hypothetical. Experimental implies that when you go for conduction of a research study, you you go with the intention of creating a disturbance between the variables and you test it with your hypothesis. The hypothesis is nothing but the hypothesis is the set of predictive or assumptive statements by which you go and carry on with your research design. Now, there are various types of research design. So the first type of research design would be on the basis of whether they are quantitative research design, whether the research design is qualitative, and whether it is a research design which is both quantitative and qualitative. So your quantitative research design would be a research design which can be measured. So in quantitative research study, what we do is we measure our research study. In qualitative research design, we go on through a subjective analysis of the same, and in combined and quantitative research design, what do? We involve both the qualitative as well as quantitative process and explain the same. So experimental research is nothing but the research in which you test the variables, you test the relationship between the variables given a proper hypothesis by which you set in. Now, the experimental research process has its own advantages and disadvantages. For example, the variables plays a very central role in an experimental research. For example, if we were to know if a particular brand of fertilizer is good for a particular plant or not. So what we will do is, we will take the breeding of the fertilizer, and with that what we do is we apply the fertilizer in the sample plots, and from there we try to see the yield or the growth which takes place. Now the correlational research is the one in which you are trying to see the relation between the two variables. So in correlational research, the research is not causal in nature. There is no cause because you have variable A, which is why you are getting variable B. It is not so in the correlational research. The correlational research is again divided into two types. The correlational research can be either positive or negative. Now, for example, to understand the concept of correlational research, let us take the example of cancer. Now, we know drinking caffeine is bad for our health, and we also are aware of the concept that smoking is also bad. Now we know too much of smoking might lead to cancer, too much of drinking caffeine might or may not lead to cancer. Now when you club the two, that you are a smoker as well as you are a frequent coffee drinker, this necessarily does not mean that you will have cancer. So it is correlational, but you do not have any assurance that because you are smoking, because you are drinking, you are having cancer. Now, correlational research is again two types of research. That is the positive correlational research and the negative correlational research. The positive correlational research is that, for example, if you have learned the habit of meditating, now what is happening here is you have started on with the process of meditation and you are seeing that it leads to an overall good quality of life in you. So this method will lead you to deduce that because you are meditating, you are having a better quality of life, you are more calm and composed now. but there is no relation that it is established that only because you are meditating you are having a good quality of life. It could be other factors like better pay packages, better adjustment of timings, and so on. So there is no causal relationship of a good quality of life and meditation. However, there could be a relation which can be analyzed and established. So that is the correlational method, the positive correlational method which is established. Now the negative correlational method would be such in which what is happening is you are given a particular situation where you are asked to identify why the grades of the children are falling. Now, being a teacher, you will go through the list of students whose grades have been falling off late, and then you come to a conclusion that these children have been missing upon your classes, and hence there is a degradation in their total marks. So what is happening here is that because of the absence of the students from the class, you are jumping into the correlational conclusion that okay, this is happening only because of their absence. However, there is no logical causal relationship to establish the relation between missing out of classes and failing of grades. What if a child prefers to be homeschooled? So those factors cannot be undermined. So in negative correlational research, again we try to establish a relation between two variables which might not be directly related to each other, but then of course because the factors can be clubbed together, you try to establish a correlational research. The survey method is nothing but sending off questionnaires in which you will pass on the questionnaires and make sure that they are answered properly so that you get a proper collection of your data. Now, as we have discussed in the earlier slides, the survey methods can be of the mail type, it can be the telephonic type, it can be the questionnaire type, it can be of the intercept type, and so on and forth. Then you have the grounded theory research. Now, grounded theory research is the qualitative research. It is the process by which you establish the question itself. So, in a grounded theory research, what happens is that from a given set of ideas, you generally go on making your own theory from grounded theory research. So in grounded theory research, you collect the set of ideas and then you make those ideas or the set of propositions from where you can induce or deduce logically your another set of propositions, and from that you make up your theory. So it is like, for example, if you have the blocks lying on the floor or jigsaw puzzle pieces lying on the floor. In grounded theory research, it is equivalent to joining the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle or the Lego blocks to create a structure. So grounded theory is nothing but the study or the research study in which a theory or a theoretical framework is conducted from the existing materials. Then we have the ethnographic research. The ethnographic research is one in which what is happening is we are trying to conduct the research by going to the places itself. So in ethnographic research, the researcher would try to see how two cultures would adapt, assimilate with each other. Now, it was developed by anthropologists who believe that the ethnographic research, when done, would actually led them to have a better understanding of the human society. Now, the ethnographic research is of the on-field side, the photographic ethnographic research, and the digital ethnographic research. Now, in photographic ethnographic research, we collect pictures from aerial views, we collect pictures on site and places where you cannot physically go, and those pictures are transmitted. The on-field study is simple. You start living with those people and you try to establish the relationship between the two. Then you have the narrative research. The narrative research is the one in which what is happening is, in narrative research, you identify the individual, and in narrative research, you try to form a story from that individual's life. For example, if today you were about to carry a research on how a particular person has his experiences of living in a forest, we have this man called Jadav Payeng who stayed in the forest for more than 25 to 30 years of his life, and what he did, he cured the forest. He started making the forest a place where he could settle, and from there the person started narrating his story to the public at a later form. So in narrative research, what is happening is that you cannot directly build up a story based on your assumptions, but here you primarily focus on the narrator, and then from there onwards you start building up your story. So that is the basic of the narrative research. So this person, Jadav Payeng's contribution towards conservation of the forest, conservation of the wildlife, the conservation of the flora, how man learn to settle and coexist with the ecological habitat, has formed a broader genre of eco-criticism research design. So narrative research also gives rise to the notion that the subject with which you are interviewing, or the subject itself, is primal of forming a guideline or framework for your research. Then you have the mixed method research. Now in mixed method research, it is a combination of both qualitative and quantitative. So you first begin with your descriptive studies, and from there onwards you carry on with what? Your exploratory studies. You start analyzing it. Then you try to fit in, apart from your experimental and correlational studies, you try to collect data from a survey research. You ground your theories, you go, you observe the ethnicity, then you give your own narration. So you employing narrative research, and action-based research again includes the culmination of both the methods, so that you can go through that entire process of research, data collection, and with a combination of both quantitative and qualitative analysis, you can get a better and focused research study. So in conclusion, there are several research proposals and designs, and the researcher must decide in advance which design would prove more appropriate for his study. So he must give an emphasis to the nature, to the purpose and objective of his proposed study, and based on that, by choosing an ideal plan, he can effectively carry on with his research process in an effective and efficient manner through collection of various methods like observations, questionnaires, schedules, and interviews. So with this, we come to the end of our presentation on research techniques and designs and proposals. Thank you.